keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm excited about this episode, getting to talk about potential starters for the 49ers that might be dark horses, maybe not getting as much conversation towards them, but they could sneak up on us and take a starting job. And I think this is one of the things that's the most difficult as you're heading into training camp is to locate potential positions that are up for grabs. And I think there's the easy ones, right? I think when you look at some of the positions and you see that there is a need there, right? Whether it's defensive tackle or offensive guard or safety or even linebacker, you see that there are some positions that have competitions that are going to unveil who's going to be the starter. And I think when I was looking at the roster, I have seen some positions that maybe there's somebody that's just sitting back there that might have an opportunity once they're on the field to potentially get a starting job. And these are some of the emails that I get is people say, hey, Ant, what about this guy? Do you think he could start? And I think it's always an interesting conversation because I do believe that there are guys that have been added to this football team that maybe nobody's thinking about as starters that could be starters, or guys who are going into year 2 or year 3 or year 4 that have an opportunity now to start. And with all things, you're an injury away, right? You're one guy going down away from having your opportunity to step in, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about guys that are going to be potentially able to beat out the guys that are ahead of them. And maybe an injury already opened the door, like with safety, for instance. But there are position groups right now where guys are just going overlooked. You've seen guys that are being drafted. You've seen guys that are being added to the roster. And players are just not even looked at right now as potential starters, even though they were probably originally added to this football team with a thought process of their depth, but they could eventually become a starter. Who are some of the guys who were added to a football team and then eventually became a starter through development? Well, some of the easy ones are guys like Azeez Al-Shaair, who the 49ers got as an undrafted free agent. They allowed him to develop. He had time. Then eventually he became a starter. Jawan Jennings, he started his career as a 7th-round pick, but then he was waived. Practice squad IR. Then when he got onto the main roster, he's never looked back. He's continued to improve every single year, but I don't think people saw him as a starter at one point. So there are guys that develop that way, but there's also guys that just step in day one, ready to roll and take their job. So it's going to be a mix. It's going to be a mix of guys who are rookies. It's going to be a mix of guys who have just added to this team. Maybe some guys that have been on the team marinating a little bit, developing, looking for their opportunity, and maybe their opportunity is here for the taking. So this is going to be a fun one. Like always, like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating if you think that I deserve it. And of course, this episode brought to you by Bet Online. So if you are going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. With baseball in full swing and football season around the corner, Bet Online has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting. From MLB, UFC, to tennis and NFL futures, Bet Online remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the Bet Online casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. Bet Online, the game starts here. So this has been an interesting one. I was going through and I was looking at the roster, and it popped into my head that with people asking me about who could potentially start, there's probably some guys that are flying under the radar that could be starters. They could be dark horses to start for this football team. And I think that it first has to have an opportunity to do so. So that was the first thing I looked at. What positions was there an opportunity? Maybe there was one position, maybe there was two positions, or maybe there was just an influx of guys. And, you know, we've talked so much about the interior part of the defensive line. We've talked so much about edge rush. I think that with the edge rush, it's been kind of figured out. There's not a dark horse per se, right? Nobody's going to be weirded out if Mikael Williams starts. I think everyone's kind of leaning that way. But if the 49ers decided it was going to be Bryce Huff, no one would really think anything about it. I don't think Yetur Gross-Matos is going to start. So with that being said, like defensive end is kind of off the table. With defensive tackle, a dark horse would be someone like Kevin Givens or Evan Anderson. And I don't think that those guys are going to start over the guys who are up top. So I'm going to kind of leave defensive line out of this conversation, which is a little bit interesting because defensive line has been a part of every conversation, it feels like, during the entire offseason. But what I am going to do is focus on the position right behind because I think that we got some unique battles at the linebacker position. Now, right now, there's a big presumption that D. Winters is probably going to start at will linebacker. I'm one of those people that are definitely in that belief. I think that D. Winters has continued to develop in his career. I thought it was really raw his rookie year. You saw the speed, you saw the athleticism, you saw the big hits, especially on special teams. You're like, okay, at some point, this guy is going to be an impact player for the 49ers. And I thought that last year we seen him kind of step into a little bit of a more prominent role, playing Sam linebacker, playing that 25% of the snaps. And of course, eventually he was thrust out there to play will linebacker as well. And I thought he played pretty well considering. You're talking about a guy that was very good in coverage, over a 70% grade last year, according to PFF. That is the type of thing that D. Winters had to do last season. Now, Robert Saleh had some pretty nice things to say about D. Winters. It said as long as he keeps up with what he's doing, he's poised for a big season in 2025. That alone right there makes me think that he's in line to start at will. Now, with that being said, there's going to be competition. It doesn't mean that he's going to start at will. It doesn't mean that a new guy like Nick Martin is going to start. And I think that has been kind of the foregone conclusion is that Nick Martin's going to be a starting linebacker in some category. But when looking at the linebacker room, you are trying to replace a guy like Dre Greenlaw. You are trying to replace the energy, the intensity, the help in the run defense with the coverage ability. I think that there's even more to it than that because the 49ers, if they do move D. Winters from Sam to Will, have to find a new Sam linebacker. But I think that there is going to be more of an open competition at linebacker than we probably think. Right now, a lot of people, and me included, would be fine if Nick Martin was up to the task and you could put Nick Martin at Sam linebacker, D. Winters at will linebacker, and put extreme speed around Fred Warner. But the name of the game is improving the 49ers run defense, especially on early downs. The investment on the defensive line illustrated their willingness to do so. You don't go add big-time bodies like Alfred Collins and C.J. West and Mikael Williams, guys that are going to be firm run stoppers, if you're not planning on that being one of the main things you're focused on at linebacker as well. Now, speed at the position is huge when you have big bodies like that, so that way they can fly around and make the plays outside of the normal box, sideline to sideline speed. That is important. But the 49ers' emphasis on run defense means that they might choose a linebacker to play Sam that's a little bit better equipped to stop the run. Now, Nick Martin is a good run defender. That is something he does well. But how quickly will he translate to the NFL game? We've seen linebackers be able to come in as rookies and translate pretty well. But I'm leaving the door open because I think there's a couple of guys that are sitting there at the linebacker room that might have an opportunity to play Sam linebacker for the 49ers. And I think it starts with Chaz Surratt. Chaz Surratt is a guy that, number one, Robert Saleh loves. He didn't draft him. He did go to Minnesota Vikings first. But the first opportunity he got to get Chaz Surratt, he grabbed him. And I think that Chaz Surratt is here for a dual purpose. I do think Brant Boyer is very interested in having him help on special teams, considering he had 10 tackles for Brant Boyer special teams last year. But when you look at the size and speed that Chaz Surratt has, this is a guy that when the instincts kick in, he flies around and makes negative plays. But the understanding of Robert Saleh's defense and the expectation is why I think he's got a good opportunity to potentially be a dark horse starter. 49ers like having a veteran, especially somebody that they could put in there with Fred Warner, and he would understand what's going on. And that's what you would get from Chaz Surratt. Right away, you wouldn't have a rookie linebacker, right? You'd have D. Winters in year 3. You'd have all pro Fred that does it all. And then you'd have Chaz Surratt, who's been in the league for 5 years. You would have a really good basis and veteran leadership at the position. Now, you're not asking your Sam linebacker to do a whole lot. He covers in space sometimes, but he comes up and stops the run. And right now, Surratt is more equipped to do that than Nick Martin because we don't know what he's going to be. And I get this. This is a thing that's going to be figured out in training camp. And Nick Martin might just come in and blow everything up and say, you know what, we can't even keep this guy off the field. He needs to play will linebacker. That's all a possibility. But I think when you're trying to understand where there's opportunities for other players to step in, and the 49ers being willing to go add a guy at the position like Luke Gifford or add a position like Chaz Surratt, you see that they're trying to add depth to the position. And I know that's dual depth, right? Special teams and defense. But you also want to bring in guys that you feel comfortable with, that if you needed them to start, they could. And Surratt has been one of those guys for the New York Jets under Robert Saleh. So I think that it's not out of the question that Surratt could compete for a starting job, especially at Sam linebacker. And, I brought up the injury bug earlier. D. Winters has dealt with a lot of injuries during his career. So when the 49ers go to training camp, I fully expect for day one of training camp for D. Winters to be the will linebacker. I think that probably behind him, and this might surprise a lot of people, I think it's going to be Nick Martin. I think Nick Martin is going to get a lot of snaps at will behind D. Winters initially because that's the position he makes the most sense to play. And they're going to go a different route at Sam linebacker. It could be Luke Gifford. It could be Chaz Surratt. It could be Tatum Bethune. I think that Surratt will probably go back and forth between Sam linebacker and will linebacker, and they're going to want him to be kind of a versatile piece. I think Gifford could play some Mike linebacker behind Fred Warner and get some work there. So this is going to be one of those things that's interesting with Surratt. But I think there's another dark horse linebacker that could start. In fact, I don't put it out of the question at all because of how good he is stopping the run, and that's Tatum Bethune. Tatum Bethune is a guy that the 49ers absolutely liked out of Florida State last year. Now, he's a late round draft pick, right? There's not a lot of draft capital that went into Bethune, but he made the 49ers initial 53-man roster, which a lot of people thought he wasn't going to do. Then he hung around all year and even got reps at the position. That is going to be invaluable. But what I brought up about Surratt is what I want to bring up about Bethune, because he is actually the better run stopper than Chaz Surratt. He's a better run stopper than a lot of the linebackers at the position. This dude is locked and loaded when it comes to getting downhill and making tackles in the run game. That's not a problem for him. So if you have an emphasis, if you're Robert Saleh, Gus Bradley in this defense, on stopping the run, especially when you're in your base 4-3 defense, you might be inclined to put a guy like Tatum Bethune in there at Sam linebacker. It might make sense for your defense. The question for Bethune is going to be, have you improved enough when it comes to pass coverage? Can you drop into your zone? Do you feel comfortable in your zone? Can you pick up the guy? Can you make the plays that you need to make in coverage? There's not going to be a lot of opportunities for him to be in coverage. When you go to your base set, a lot of times it's run defense. So the 49ers could definitely figure this thing out. They play their sub packages way more than they play their base sets. But I don't think Bethune is out of the question to get into that role. He could be a potential starter at Sam linebacker. And that might be crazy to say. But when you look out there week one, if the 49ers are putting a focus on stopping the run, especially in the first matchup against Seattle, who's going to have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet and all the running backs that they have, and probably an emphasis from Kubiak to run the football there, they might want Bethune to be able to go in there and stop the run. I think he's a little bit more dark horse than some of the other guys. I do think Nick Martin is the most likely to be out there, but Bethune has worked his body. He's gotten into a prime position to be able to step in. And I think that before the draft, I was leaning towards Tatum Bethune potentially starting at Sam linebacker. Now, the Nick Martin thing definitely changes. So this is now a dark horse, a potential. Chaz Surratt Tatum Bethune. I don't think they're out of the question as Sam linebacker because of the strengths they have. And really, Bethune is the best at it. But he's going to have to be better in coverage. Surratt is good enough in coverage that as long as the run defense is there, he's going to have a chance. I still think the 49ers prefer D. Winters and Nick Martin. But I just want to say these two guys are not out of the question, especially if Martin has any struggles picking it up. Now, let's go to the safety position. Malik Mustafa looks pretty good. I don't know if you guys have seen this social media video. Malik Mustafa's running around, doing some things, looking pretty good. But you've got a position open now. Jair Brown should be back from his injury. He will be ready to go for training camp. I expect Jair Brown to be one of the starting safeties, especially through training camp. But then after that, we've been talking about Jason Pinnock. Jason Pinnock is not exactly a dark horse now to start because a lot of people are bringing him up about potentially starting opposite of Jair Brown. But I think that there's a guy that is not being talked about enough as a potential starter because he hasn't been on the field yet. And that is Marquise Siegel. And I know this one might surprise a lot of people. But Marquise Siegel out of Kansas State, the 49ers' 5th round pick, would make a tremendous amount of sense to start next to Jair Brown. And here's why. First off, you're adding a guy that runs a 4.37. That athleticism alone sets him apart from the other safeties in the room. Nobody runs a 4.37 in the 49ers safety room. In fact, they haven't really had a guy that's done that in the time that Kyle Shanahan's been in San Francisco. So that's first off. Second is they rave about his intelligence, his football IQ. Anytime you get a coaching staff that raves about that element of a player's game, that means it's somebody that could pick up things extremely fast, which means the learning curve goes down. If you understand what you're seeing and what you're doing, that's going to allow you to do it a lot quicker. So where the normal transition for a guy like Talanoa Hufanga through the years, or Jair Brown or Malik Mustafa, where they worked in their rookie year, maybe Marquise Siegel's further along and able to potentially start. And part of the reason I put that out there is when you get the athleticism and versatility of Marquise Siegel, combined with the fact he's now a Robert Saleh guy, because Saleh is the one that wanted him a part of this defense, and the fact that I see him as a comparison to Jimmy Ward because he played in the nickel in college and has the ability to cover in the slot, I think that there's a lot to like, and I think that that would marry very nice with the game that Jair Brown plays. I think Marquise Siegel's areas of strength definitely complement Jair Brown's strengths. So you get a good pairing there. And I think Siegel's capabilities are far beyond what we saw on film in college. I think that he can cover a deep third. I think he can cover a deep half. He can definitely step up into the box and light you up. He can walk up into the slot and cover a tight end or a running back or even a slot receiver if you need it. That athleticism, that speed, he's got some fluid hips. I think that gives him an opportunity to go out and compete. So the questions are going to be, how quickly can he pick up this defense? It's like Nick Martin. If you can pick it up extremely quick, you can pick it up fast, you're going to have an opportunity. And there is a position, an opportunity to do so. Now, do I believe that he's first in line for this position? No. Do I think he's going to get an opportunity? Yes. I won't be shocked if at training camp you see Jair Brown and Jason Pinnock lined up together at starting safety. But that next unit is going to be fun. Marquise Siegel and Richie Grant. And I don't think it's out of the question that Richie Grant can't enter this conversation as a potential starter either. I put Jason Pinnock and Jair Brown ahead of him, especially now. But Richie Grant was a second-round pick who really didn't fit in Atlanta very well. But we've seen safeties struggle in other organizations and then come to the 49ers and be successful. We saw other safeties that maybe weren't looking like their career was going to extend, and then they come here and they have a renaissance. This is a safety-friendly team for the most part. So I think Richie Grant's athleticism, his abilities to cover in space, but also come up and make tackles, make him another versatile piece. I do believe that Marquise Siegel has a better chance of starting than Richie Grant because of the traits that he has and the physicality that he plays with. I think that he could. So this is going to be a fun competition in camp to watch, is just seeing what happens with that first team, that first unit at safety, and then the second unit. And do we ever see Marquise Siegel line up next to Jair Brown as starting safeties? That's going to be interesting. Another pairing I would love to see at safety would be Siegel and Pinnock, because Jason Pinnock is one of the best blitzing safeties. In fact, last year he was the best blitzing safety in the entire NFL. The guy just got after the quarterback at a high level. Jaden Daniels hated to see him in the backfield because he was making plays. So having him step in the box while Siegel played the back end could be very interesting. So I think Marquise Siegel's a dark horse, just depending on how quickly he picks up this defense. And I don't think he's been talked about enough. I just don't think he's been, mentioned in that category enough. And in fact, I think he's also a dark horse if he doesn't start at safety, could potentially play nickel corner. And you might be saying, but we drafted Upton Stout. We did. But we've seen the 49ers fool around with this idea before, is taking a guy who played a lot in the slot and played a lot at a nickel spot in college, step up. Look at a guy like Jimmy Ward. And I've said this before, the versatility of Marquise Siegel reminds me of Jimmy Ward. Ward, of course, was drafted and put at corner by Trent Baalke and that regime, so it's a different regime. But the 49ers also asked Jimmy Ward, when he came back from injury his last year in San Francisco, to go play nickel corner. If for some reason Upton Stout was struggling a little bit, wasn't transitioning to play nickel corner really fast, yeah, they could go with Trey Brown, but they could also take a look at Marquise Siegel. And that might be asking a lot of him to potentially play safety and step in at nickel corner. Maybe that's not something they want to do. But when you're talking about a guy who's got the speed that he has, he's got fluid hips, the ability to turn and run, change direction, but he's 5'11", 200 pounds. He's got a little bit more size, a little bit more length than Upton Stout. And we've seen the 49ers struggle a little bit with the transition from players from college to nickel corner. Maybe that plays into this as well, and Marquise Siegel gets a look at corner. And I think that they look at him for this reason, because I think when they go to nickel, you're going to have your nickel corner out there, which could be Upton Stout. But also when you go to dime, it might make sense for them to put Siegel in there. Yeah, you could go with a 3 safety look, or sometimes you could take it and put another corner in there and put Siegel in there for coverage reasons. But I think there's going to be opportunities to take a look at him and what he looks like in the slot, in the dime situation, and see what him and Upton Stout do, how they compete. So I don't think it's out of the question that we see Marquise Siegel potentially start at safety, and I don't think it's out of the question you could possibly see him start at nickel either. I think that's how versatile of a piece he is. Now, do I think that it's going to happen? I don't know. I think right now I'm still leaning towards Jason Pinnock as starting next to Jair Brown. But in training camp, if Siegel shows up and shows out, I think all bets are off. They want this guy to succeed. No matter how quickly it happens, they want him to succeed. So he's going to be somebody I'm going to keep an eye on for sure all throughout training camp. Another guy who's a dark horse to start. And the reason I have this guy, and I did a full breakdown of him over on Patreon, which you can go check out, is Dallas Flowers, the cornerback. And he has flew under the radar of everybody. Nobody even brings this guy up for the most part. But when you're talking 6'1", 200 pounds with length, you've got a guy that fits the 49ers scheme. Whether you're running the cover 3 or the cover 4, he fits. He's got good zone eyes as well. This is a guy that reads the receiver to the quarterback, is able to, come off his guy, sag and make plays, the length, the ability to jump. And he was starting for the Indianapolis Colts or Gus Bradley in 2023. In fact, he started the first 4 games, did pretty well. He allowed completions on 70% of the passes he was targeted, but he gave up no touchdowns. It was pretty good play there. He was targeted, I can't remember the total number, but he gave up 13 catches. So it wasn't terrible in those four games. But this was a guy that they were very high on. In fact, he tore his Achilles and tried to come back in 2024, and Gus Bradley was still saying, this guy could be a starter for us. This is a guy that with length, ability, vision, IQ, knowing how to play the position, he could end up being a starter for us again. They really liked him. They had a competition there. Now, unfortunately for Dallas Flowers, he was not the same player. And we know it usually takes, 18 months for somebody to recover from an Achilles injury and get back to the player that they were. And so now we've gotten to that point where it's been 18 months and hopefully the athleticism is back. But he reunites with Gus Bradley. And I think when you look at the 49ers, I think there's less of an opportunity with Deommodore Lenoir's new comments that he's going to play on the outside for an outside corner. So I do think there's probably more of a competition on the inside when you're talking about Stout, you're talking about Trey Brown, right? These guys competing on the inside. But if Dallas Flowers is playing well enough that they say, you know what, let's go back to putting Deommodore Lenoir on the inside, then he's got a shot. There's a chance that he could be. It's a dark horse. Don't get me wrong. This is a dark horse. But I think all the things that were being said about Isaac Yedem last year, about how, he was potentially going to step in as that third corner, and make some plays for this football team. I think those are the things that should be getting said about Dallas Flowers, because I do think that he's a key veteran to this team. I think he's got a real good shot. And I think he's what puts Darrell Luter Jr. on the bubble. I want Darrell Luter Jr. to step up. I know the 49ers invested in him. I want him to be that player. I don't think that he's a dark horse to start. But I think when you look at Dallas Flowers and the amount of starts that he's had in the NFL, it's only been in the league since 2022. But he started games. He's played, a lot of games in this league, and he's a special teams threat as well. But I just think that he's an outside chance, a dark horse, more of a dark horse maybe than anybody else that I've talked about. But just keep an eye on Dallas Flowers throughout training camp. I think he's going to be somebody interesting. Now, on the inside of the offensive line, there are two dark horses I think that could start. And both of them are kind of in the same situation. Number one is Nick Zakelj. Nick Zakelj is a interesting guy because the 49ers have such high hopes for him when they drafted him in 2021 in the 6th round out of Fordham. He is a guy that is, because he's 6'6", 320 pounds, but can still move, is hyper intelligent. They saw him as a future center prospect that could take over for Jake Brendel. And I think that they've been waiting for that to happen. Now, with the opening at left guard, it presents an interesting opportunity for Nick Zakelj. Ben Bartch is the presumed starter. That is the case. That's the truth. And I think Bartch's numbers last year kind of backed that up. Now, he didn't have a lot of snaps, just like 65 plus snaps at guard last year, and he graded out pretty well across the board. But that's not a big sample size. And I think that Nick Zakelj's not out of the question. I think he's going to get a chance to play left guard. I think he's going to get a chance to play center. Same with Matt Hennessy. The 49ers are looking for a player that can do both. They're looking for a player that can step in. But I think that both of these guys are well equipped to be able to go in there and outduel Ben Bartch. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think Bartch is the presumed starter. What I'm saying is Nick Zakelj is so good when it comes to pass blocking that there could be an opportunity here. And Mike Kenny, he always leaves comments, and they're phenomenal comments. If you go to the comment section and read what he has to say, he's got good perspective. He talked about Jake Brendel's knees, and that's something that has kept Jake Brendel, kind of struggling a little bit. Last year, it really reared up. He didn't play until training camp. He missed like all of OTAs. There could be an injury opportunity for a guy like Hennessy or Zakelj to step in. And if they can be consistent in training camp, they could make the 49ers think about this. Because Zakelj and Hennessy are better anchors than Jake Brendel. Where they have to catch Jake Brendel is the ability to get to the second level. Jake Brendel is an elite guy getting from his center position to guard. Not an elite blocker when he gets there. He's good. Most of the time, he'll get in front of somebody. He's not great. If these guys could show that they can do that and get there where Brendel can and then make that block a little bit more effectively, they have a shot. And I think that it's going to be really tough to beat out Jake Brendel. I put Jake Brendel as a lock to make this team because I think that Chris Furster is sold on Jake Brendel, at least for another season. But there could be a door open at left guard or center for one of these guys to make this team and ultimately start. So to me, they are dark horse potential. I don't have them out of the mix to potentially start. I don't think you're going to have a new starter at left tackle. I don't think you're going to have a new starter at right tackle or right guard. But left guard and center, I think left guard especially is a little bit more up for grabs, and these guys are going to get consistent reps. And like I said, you're an injury away from potentially having a spot there. So I think that there are dark horses to potentially start for the San Francisco 49ers football team. So let me know, who are your dark horse potential starters? Did I hit them? Is there somebody else you want to talk about? I'm curious what you have to say. Now, there's a couple of guys that I think are somewhat dark horses, but people don't consider dark horses. A guy like CJ West, I don't think he's poised to start. I think Alfred Collins is going to start. So I didn't put CJ West in there because I think it's more realistic, right? I think that there's a chance he could start. I don't think he's a dark horse by any means. I think he's in people's minds to do that. And then another guy that could be a potential starter if the 49ers need an X receiver is Jordan Watkins. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. I thought that one was like a real stretch, and it didn't make the most sense, but I thought I would go ahead and bring him up. So let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about it. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network. Please give it a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys on the next one. So stay safe and remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.